With situation, I'd say I miss my friends, but we all know I ain't got none.
So I just wrote, arranged and recorded a full song using only the iPad Pro and my guitar. I know that there are some pretty awesome videos out there showing you how to do this using GarageBand, which is pretty cool, but there are so many fun and useful apps on the App Store and I like to use many of them, so I figured let's make a song with them and showcase them. So before we listen to the song, here's the story of how it was created. First up is the app Navichord. Whether you're an experienced musician or just learning the ropes right now, Navichord will help you. It lets you pick a scale and instantly shows you which notes you can use as well as which chords are available to you and their relations to one another. In other words, it can help you out of a rut when you're trying to finish that tricky chord progression. Okay, so I already know that I want the song to be in the key of A, but just to demonstrate Navichord's prowess, I decided to go extra exotic, so I picked A Hungarian. Now here's how this sounds. Yeah, very exotic. As you can imagine, it's going to be tricky to come up with a chord progression that will sound acceptable to our ears. So yes, I will cheat and change tonalities here and there, but I will use this as a general guideline of which notes I want to be in the song. Once you have your mind set on a chord, you can save it on this trigger pad. Once the pads are set up, you can even go in and edit the chord voicings to get the inversions you want in there. So here's our song. And what's even cooler about it is that you can use Navichord as a MIDI controller and send every one of these voicings on a separate MIDI channel. Yeah, very exotic. As you can imagine, it's gonna be tricky to come up with a chord progression that sounds acceptable to our ears, so I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna switch tonalities, go around a little bit, but I am going to use the A Hungarian as my basis to always come back to. And what's even cooler about it is that you can use Navichord as a MIDI controller and send every one of these voicings on a separate MIDI channel. Now it's time to come up with some riffs and some melodies. For this purpose I like to use Oxy Pro. It has a super simple, super easy to use MIDI editor. Whenever I have an idea about a riff or harmonics in my head, I quickly just type it away in this app so I can hear it. For the purposes of this song, I'm actually going to build the entire intro with Oxy Pro because it kind of has that sound that's in my head. Setting up the different loops in separate scenes is very easy, and when you press export song, the app exports the scenes in consecutive order. Now that we have our chord progression figured out, we have a melody, it's time to move into a DAW. Cubase is probably the best, it's just a bit pricey. If you just want to dip your toes into it, there are some cheaper options that you can consider. There's Beatmaker 3, which is $27 and still quite good, and here we have Beatmaker 2, which is really showing its age now, but it's $12 and it can still help you get some kind of a job done. It's an OK DAW with some basic effects, a convenient MIDI editor which works great on touchscreen, and a lot of samples which sound, well, they sound kinda meh, but at least they help you get your song structure right. So I wrote a bass track, I put a sax in there and some pads, some piano. To get some better sounding samples, I installed Sample Tank by IK Multimedia. Thanks to Interrupt Audio, I can send MIDI from Beatmaker to Sample Tank and get the sounds from Sample Tank into Beatmaker and record them. Sample Tank has some okay sounding samples, and its bass is usable and its sax doesn't sound too bad. But for piano I did go out and get iGrand Piano, which has better samples. You may have noticed I still don't have drums in there. That's because I'm a bit lazy. I am actually going to use GarageBand here with the live drummer option because it saves me so much trouble. So I exported the bass MIDI file from Beatmaker and imported it into a new GarageBand song. Then I made a live drummer track and I told it to follow the bass track, fiddled with the sliders and the options until I got the drum sound I wanted. Then I exported the drums as an actual song and imported that audio file back into Beatmaker. Now it's time to plug my audio interface in and record some guitars. I do use Bias FX because I believe it's one of the best guitar signal processors for iOS and iPadOS. I am going to record two guitars here, one playing through a 5153, one through a Mesa Boogie. What's kind of bad here is that I don't get the option to reamp my guitars later due to my setup. You can kind of do it with Cubasis and Audio Bus, but it's still a bit too fiddly, a bit too finicky, and quite the workload to be worth it. So I just try to set my sound up as best as I can and hope to be able to fix it with EQ should I need to later. Now some bad news. Time to record vocals, and as you can imagine, I really don't have access to a singer right now. I actually wanted to use Antares Autotune Mobile to fix my terrible singing, but unfortunately it hasn't been working for some months now. You get some hisses, you get some pops, some delays while recording. Some version of iPad OS broke it a few months back, and we're still waiting on a fix. In other words, I'm quite sorry for my singing. Secondly, the iPad Pro now has studio quality microphones, so I wanted to sync directly into the iPad. Now, obviously, that's a pretty vague marketing term. There are a lot of different microphones you can find in the studio. Dynamic, large membrane, ribbon mics, cardio, blah, 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 whatever. Obviously, I didn't expect it to sound amazing, I just did it for the memes. This microphone does sound pretty good when dealing with even dynamics. YouTuber iPhone though recorded a really awesome acoustic guitar track with the iPad Pro mics. But when it comes to high dynamics, this is not a dynamic microphone. Like in this song, in the beginning, I'm silent, by the chorus I'm already yelling, and it's constantly changing up the frequency response on me, which made it pretty hard to mix afterwards. Also, check me out using my winter hat as a pop filter. Now it's time to mix everything. Thankfully, Beatmaker 2 has all of the basic tools that I need. Parametric EQ, bus tracks, and a compressor which supports sidechaining. It still wasn't the best experience. The interface can only show you one effect at a time, one instrument at a time, so it was fiddly to say the least. Still doable, and I'm pretty sure that someone who's better than me at this would have been able to come up with a better sound. Time for the big finish, the final mastering. I used Grand Finale by Clef Grand, and I'm very sorry if I'm butchering that name. I like this developer, their apps are skimmed, simple, you have everything you need in a very elegant interface. So about 32 versions of mastering later, I think I was done. So before we go ahead and listen to the song, final thoughts. Can you actually make entire songs on this thing? Probably, yeah, sure. You're not going to want to though. I'm thinking for simple tracks, maybe royalty-free music, you can definitely find some apps with the proper samples that work great together, don't need a lot of mastering and not a lot of fiddling, so you can churn out products easily even while on the go. For the actual writing process of the song, I actually really enjoyed the tools that the iPad gave me, and I can imagine it's a great tool to just add to your studio for its interface and features. But if you intend to record actual instruments, then mix them with samples from different sources, then EQ and master, it's not impossible, but it's quite fiddly, quite a bit of a headache, and I imagine people would prefer to use a computer still for that big project.
Stuck in isolation, but it's no vacation. There's a weird confrontation, burn the 5G towers down. My closet's full of toilet paper, my body's soaked in soap and vapor. I can't help but wonder and think which brand of bleach is best to drink. At least I have a good excuse to not visit Grandma for Easter. I'm just kidding, Grandma, please don't stop sending me dinner. This isolation is no vacation. The boss still stabs me with every complication. situation. I'd say I miss my friends, but we all know I ain't got none.
Well, you've made it this far. If you hated it, let me know in the comments below. If you liked it, let me know in the comments below. Also, there's a subscribe button somewhere around there. Maybe a like button. So, see you next time.